Welcome back to Take Care Time, the tales and the exhales of caregivers. I'm your host, Beverly Nance. I get a lot of letters about people's caregiving stories, and sometimes they move you to tears, sometimes they make you laugh. But this particular story is something that I hear about a lot and something that I think about a lot. It's about the caregiver's own health. And I gotta tell you, before we start this episode, before we move on with this story, it's a very emotional episode. Because I've read a lot of letters and I've read about addictions, I've read about hospice, all sorts of things. And the letter that this story is created around, it touches you. It really touches you. So let's move on with this episode. I just wanted to give you that disclaimer up front that it is an emotional episode. So, if you're going to get triggered by it, take some time to listen to it when you're in the mood to deal with it better. When you're in a different mindset, because this episode, more than most letters, it sits closest to the exact fear this entire series is built around. Because up until now, Out of Order has been about the pattern, the chest tightness filed under stress, the doctor's appointment that kept sliding, the quiet, cumulative cost of a caregiver who has stopped monitoring her own body while monitoring everything else. Today, the pattern stops being a pattern. Today, it becomes something else. Let's slow down here because I want you to be ready for where this goes. Sharon sat in the parking lot of Dr. Fenwick's office for 5 full minutes before she went inside. Their neighbor was at the house with Martin, a 2-hour window that Sharon had accepted with gratitude so profound it had nearly undone her at the front door, the way small kindnesses sometimes undo people who have gone a very long time without receiving any. She had not been inside the building in 14 months. The waiting room looked exactly the same abstract painting of a lighthouse that hung crookedly on the wall for as long as Sharon had been a patient here. The same slightly worn chairs, the same receptionist, Marjorie, who greeted Sharon by name with a warmth that suggested that she had genuinely missed her, which somehow made the 14-month gap feel both smaller and larger at the same time. Dr. Fenwick, when she finally called Sharon back, hugged her before she did anything else. "It's been a long time," Dr. Fenwick said, and there was something in her voice, warm, but with an undercurrent Sharon could not quite name, that made Sharon's stomach tighten before a single test had even been run. Dr. Fenwick took Sharon's blood pressure first, and Sharon watched her physician's face carefully enough to notice a small, controlled shift in her expression as she read the number. "That's quite elevated," Dr. Fenwick said. "Have you been having any chest discomfort? Shortness of breath? Anything like that?" Sharon hesitated. 14 months of practice deflection did not disappear simply because she had finally made it into the office. "Some tightness," Sharon admitted finally. "The past few weeks. I assumed it was stress." "How long has a few weeks actually been?" Dr. Fenwick asked, in a careful, patient tone of a physician who had heard this particular minimization many times before and knows exactly how to gently unravel it. Sharon looked at her hands. "Closer to 2 months," she admitted. Dr. Fenwick did not react with alarm. She simply nodded, made a note, and continued the examination with the same steady thoroughness she had always brought to Sharon's care, back when Sharon had still been the kind of patient who showed up for her appointments. She ordered an EKG. She ordered blood work, and 40 minutes later, sitting across from Sharon in her office rather than the exam room, a shift that Sharon understood immediately as significant. Dr. Fenwick delivered the news that would, within an hour, change absolutely everything. Sharon, Dr. Fenwick said, your EKG is showing some concerning changes. Combined with the blood pressure and the symptoms you described, I believe you are dealing with significant, poorly controlled hypertension that has likely been building for a long time, and there are early signs of cardiac strain that I do not want to ignore. Sharon sat very still. I want to be direct with you, Dr. Fenwick continued, because I think you deserve directness, then because I do not think you would thank me for softening this. This is serious, not immediately catastrophic, but serious. Your heart has been working under a level of strain for a long time that most bodies are not built to sustain indefinitely. You need to start treatment immediately, and I want you back here in 1 week for a follow-up. And I want you to seriously consider a cardiology referral. Sharon's first thought, immediate and involuntarily, was not for herself. Martin, she said, if something happens to me. She could not finish the sentence, the same way Martin had been unable to finish his own version of it at their kitchen table. That, Dr. Fenwick said gently, is exactly why we are addressing this today, rather than in 6 more months, when the strain may have progressed considerably further. Sharon, I need you to hear this clearly. This is not a symptom you can file away until later. Your body has been telling you this for months. I am telling you now, as your physician, and I hope as someone who cares about you. This requires immediate attention. She wrote a prescription. She reviewed instructions for taking it. She scheduled the follow-up in 1 week. And she looked at Sharon with an expression that carried real, unmistakable concern. I want you to go straight home and rest, Dr. Fenwick said. No errands, no stops. If you feel any chest pain, any dizziness, any shortness of breath on your way home, I want you to pull over immediately and call 911. Do you understand me? I understand, Sharon said. She did not entirely understand, not yet. Nobody fully understands the gravity of a warning like that until the warning turns out to have been necessary. Let's stop right here and pump the brakes for a minute, because I want to give you the fuller research picture behind what just happened in Dr. Fenwick's office. Chronic, unmanaged stress of exactly the kind that long-term family caregiving produces has a well-documented, measurable effect on cardiovascular health. Sustained, elevated cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, contributes directly to hypertension, atrial inflammation, and increased cardiac workload over time. Research on caregiver cardiovascular health has found that family caregivers, particularly those providing high-intensity, long-duration care, show significantly elevated rates of hypertension compared to non-caregiving adults of the same age, and that this risk climbs the longer caregiving continues without adequate relief or support. This is not a rare or unusual outcome. It is, according to research, closer to a predictable one. When caregiving strain goes unaddressed for extended periods, the particular dangerous piece of the pattern, the piece that Sharon's story is trying to illuminate, is that hypertension itself frequently produces no dramatic symptoms until it has already caused significant damage. It is sometimes called a silent condition for exactly this reason. Chest tightness, the kind Sharon experienced, can be present, but it is easy, especially for an exhausted caregiver, to misattribute to stress rather than to recognize as a cardiovascular warning sign in its own right. If you are a caregiver and it has been more than a year since your blood pressure was checked by a medical professional, I want to say this as plainly and directly as Dr. Fenwick said it to Sharon. This is not a small oversight. Blood pressure checks are quick, inexpensive, and can be done in most pharmacies without even an appointment. Please do not wait for a crisis to find out where yours currently stands. Back to the story. Sharon left Dr. Fenwick's office at 2:40 in the afternoon. She called the neighbor first, sitting in the parking lot, to check on Martin and to let her know that she was on her way home. He's fine. He watched his program. He asked about you twice. I told him that you would be home soon. Sharon thanked her, ended the call, and pulled out of the parking lot. The route home took 18 minutes on an ordinary day, along a road Sharon had driven so many thousands of times that her hands and eyes managed most of it without any real conscious participation from the rest of her mind. She was thinking as she drove about the prescription in her purse, about the follow-up appointment, now marked in her phone's calendar, sitting for the first time in 14 months alongside Martin's medication reminders and physical therapy appointments, finally occupying the same protected status Gracie had insisted she deserved. She was thinking about Martin's face when he asked about her twice in 2 hours. She was thinking distantly about how tired she still felt, even after finally doing the thing everyone had been asking her to do for months. At 2:52 in the afternoon, 6 minutes from home, Sharon felt something shift in her chest. Not the familiar tightness, something sharper, something that spread within seconds into her left arm, into her jaw, with an intensity that made the steering wheel suddenly feel very far away from her hands. Let's slow down here, because I think it matters how I tell you what happened next. And I want to tell you the way it was actually pieced together afterwards, from witnesses, from the responding officers, from the hospital records that Kimberly would later request in a terrible, methodical way, that grief sometimes makes people methodical. Sharon's car drifted across the center lane at a slow speed and struck a parked delivery van at the edge of a residential street, 6 minutes from her own driveway. The impact, mercifully, was not severe. The delivery van was empty. No other vehicles were involved. No other person was injured. But Sharon was unconscious behind the wheel when a passing neighbor, a woman named Priya, who happened to be walking her dog at the exact moment, ran to the car and found her slumped against the seatbelt, her face gray, her breathing shallow and irregular. Priya called 911 immediately. She stayed on the line, following the dispatcher's instructions, checking for a pulse, describing what she was seeing, with the specific adrenaline-sharpened clarity that emergencies sometimes produce in ordinary people who happen to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. What the paramedics found, and what the emergency room would later confirm, was that Sharon had suffered a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, almost certainly connected, though this would be studied more accurately in the days that followed, to significant long-term, long-untreated hypertension and cardiac strain. Dr. Fenwick had identified less than an hour earlier. She was alive. I want to say that clearly and let you know immediately, because I do not want you carrying unnecessary dread through the rest of this episode. Sharon was alive, but she was in an ambulance, then an emergency room, then a cardiac care unit, entirely unable to communicate, entirely unable to call home, entirely unable to do the one thing that had organized every single hour of her life for the past 9 months. Take care of Martin. Deborah stayed at the house. This detail matters enormously, and I want you to sit with it, because it is a detail that separates this story from the one I told you about at the very beginning of the series. Sharon had asked Deborah to stay only until she returned, but Deborah, sensing something was not right when Sharon's 18-minute drive home stretched past 30 minutes without word, made a decision of her own. She stayed. She kept Martin fed, kept him engaged in his afternoon program, kept the household running on its ordinary rhythm, all while quietly, calmly, trying Sharon's phone every 10 minutes with growing concern that she was careful not to let Martin see. At 3:40 in the afternoon, a police officer knocked on the front door. Deborah answered it. Not Martin, Deborah. I want to pause here and tell you directly what I think this episode is actually about, because I think it would be easy to hear the drama of a car accident and a heart attack and miss the quieter, more important thing sitting underneath it. In February of 2025, when Betsy Arakawa died in her home, there was no Deborah. There was no neighbor who had been asked to stay a little longer, watching for a delay that meant something was wrong. There was no community support network quietly assembled over the preceding weeks, ready to absorb the shock of exactly this kind of moment. There was simply Gene Hackman alone in his house with no system in place to notice that the person keeping him alive was no longer able to. Sharon's story, up to this exact moment, was heading toward the same devastating outcome. A caregiver whose own health had been deteriorating for months. A care recipient entirely dependent on that one person. No formal backup plan for what would happen if her body failed, which it very nearly did. At 2:52 in the afternoon, 6 minutes from home, but something was different this time. Gracie had knocked on that door. Gracie had built quietly and without fanfare, a small network of people who were paying attention. Deborah willing to sit with Martin, a church committee ready to organize support, a neighborhood, however informally, that had begun watching out for a family that had been, until recently, entirely alone. And because of that network, when the unthinkable happened, when Sharon's own body finally gave out, the way her own doctor had warned it might, Martin was not left in the house with no one to notice. He had Deborah sitting with him. Right at that moment, everything changed. I do not want to leave you today without saying directly, because I think this episode asks something significant of everyone listening. If you are a caregiver and some part of you recognize yourself in Sharon today, the chest tightness dismissed as stress, the appointment that kept sliding, the practice fine that you have told everyone who loves you, I want you to hear this clearly. Your body is not a background system that will simply wait its turn. It has been asking for attention right now in whatever small or large way it has been asking, and I'm asking you, as directly as I know how, to actually listen. And if you are the person on the outside, the Gracie, the Deborah, the neighbor who has noticed something that is not quite right, I want you to hear this too. What you do matters more than you may ever fully know. A binder, a casserole, a willingness to stay a little longer than you were originally asked to. These small, unglamorous acts of attention are sometimes the entire difference between a story like Gene Hackman's and the story where someone survives long enough to be found, to be helped, to come home. Sharon is in that hospital right now, fighting for her own life in a way that she never once let herself prioritize for the past 9 months. And because of Gracie, because of Deborah, because of a small, quiet network of people who decide to pay attention, Martin is not alone. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Next time on Out of Order, Kimberly's plane touches down, and the hospital room that smells like antiseptic and fear. A mother and daughter finally have the conversation that 9 months of Sunday phone calls never allowed. Before I let you go, I want to mention the Take Care Time Respite Box. If today's episode felt a little too close to your own life, I want you to know that noticing that is not weakness. It is information, and it deserves attention. The current Respite Box is available at takecaretime.com. That's takecaretime.com. Has your own body ever tried to tell you something you did not have the time to listen to? I want to hear from you. You can reach me at podcast@takecaretime.com. We would love to tell your story. Please note that this episode features reenactments and dramatized details. While in most cases the exact verbatim dialogue may not be known, all dramatizations are grounded in thorough research and crafted to honor the story shared. To respect the privacy and confidentiality of individuals involved, names and some identifying details have been changed. This episode and all content of Take Care Time, the tales and the excels of caregivers, are protected by copyright and may not be reproduced, distributed, or reused without written permission. Until next week, take care.